go ahead and try to do this problem. Well, let's try to simplify it as best as we can. Well, it's x squared plus 8x plus 16 is equal to 0. Well, what can we do here? Well, what we can do here is say, what adds to give us 8 and multiplies to give us 16? Well, that would be 8. Well, let's do the factors of 16 first. 1, 16, 2 and 8, and 4 and 4. Well, 1 and 16 multiplied gives you 16, but 1 plus 16 gives you 17, which is not 8, so can't use this. So 8 times 2, that gives you 16, but 2 plus 8 is 10, so you can't use this either. So 4 times 4 gives you 16, but if you add those, you get 4 plus 4 is equal to 8, so you can use this. So let's go ahead and break this up. Have x plus 4, and then x plus 4 is equal to 0. Now, what I can do here is you can be able to go ahead and do, what if you had made it into a square? Made this triangle square. Well, is that the same thing? It should be the same thing, all right? So it should be the same thing. So what we can do here now is we can do the square root both of these. So then you have x plus 4 is equal to 0, because the square root of 0 is just 0. So now our x value, we could go ahead and find that. We have, what we can find is our x. So what we do to get our x by itself? So we would subtract 4 to both sides, and this will 0 out. The middle terms will 0 out because 4 minus 4 is 0, so that just zeroes out. So x is equal to 0 minus 4, so that gives you x is equal to negative 4. And that should be your answer. Well, look easy, not too terrible, all right? So what if I gave you a different problem? Let's just say if I took out the plus 16. What if I took out the plus 16 and I put negative 10? What if I did that? Well, can we still be able to factor this out? Well, let's go ahead and find out. Well, like I said before, we have, let's just go ahead and try this. What adds to give us 8, and then multiply to give you negative 10? All right. Well, let's try it. So we have 1 and negative 10. You can do 2 and negative 5. And you do negative 5, 2, and negative 1, and 10. Alright. So 1 times negative 10 does give you negative 10, but 1 minus 10, that gives you negative 9, which we can't use. So what if we did 2 times negative 5? That gives you negative 10. However, does 2 plus negative 5 give you 8? No, because that gives you negative 3. So we can't use this either. So negative 5 times 2, that does give you negative 10. But does negative 5 plus 2 give you 8 plus 8? It doesn't, because it gives you negative 3. So if you did, let's just say you did negative 1 times 10. Well, you get -10, but -1 plus 10, that gives you 9. You can't use this either. Wow, we're at a loss here. So, what can we do here to be able to get us our answer? Well, we could use quadratic formula, but that would take too long. So we could also use something much simpler than that. We can use completing the square to go ahead and solve for this. How do we do completing the square? Well, we're gonna go ahead and find out right now. So now, completing the square. So completing the square. So how would we go about doing completing the square? Well, we can go ahead and take you step by step on what we have to do. So step number 1, well, we're gonna have to get our variables onto one side and get our integers on the other side. Well, our variables are x and x. So we're gonna keep that to one side and we're gonna have to get rid of this -10. Well, how do we do that? Well, let's go ahead and add the 10 to the other side. So what we add to one side, we have to add to the other side. You have x squared plus 8x is equal to 10. So that would be our first step. So now, completing the square, the completing the square part is basically b over 2 squared equals. So now, what would we use for b? What would be our b so that we can be able to plug in into this completing the square part? Well, pause the video, think about it for 1 minute, and come back when you have an idea or what you think we will be able to use for b. Well, now that you're back, we have b over 2 squared. Well, what is our b? Well, we have our b would be plus 8. So let's go ahead and plug that in. We have 8 over 2 squared is equal. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is equal to 16. So now, once we got our answer here, we can go ahead and add 16 to both sides. So now we have x squared plus 8x plus 16 is equal to 10 plus 16. So now we can go ahead and break this down. Go ahead and do x plus 8x plus 16. So what's 10 plus 16? That gives you 26. So now, can we be able to factor this out now? X squared plus 8x plus 16? Can we factor that out now? Well, actually, we just did. We just did x squared plus 8x plus 16. We just did that in the previous problem. So we're gonna go ahead and do it. So because x plus 4 and x plus 4 is equal to 26. And that's true, because if we go ahead and FOIL this, we would have x squared plus 4x plus 16. And that basically gives you this. So now we can go ahead and, well, this would be a lot easier because we have x plus 4 squared, because x plus 4 times x plus 4. That is x plus 4 squared. So this will be equal to 26. Huh. Well, now what do we do? Well, let's think about it. We have this squared. So what can we do to get rid of a square? Well, we could be able to use square root. Well, once you square root a squared, they just cancel. So you're just left with x plus 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root 26. So now, what would you do to get x by itself? Well, let's go ahead and do this. We can be able to get x by itself by, you guessed it, we can subtract negative 4 on both sides. So when you subtract negative 4 on both sides, x is equal plus x is equal to square root of 26 minus 4, and x is also equal to negative square root of 26 minus 4. And this will be your answer. Alright, very straightforward, shouldn't be too difficult. So, well, I want to go ahead and see if you guys can be able to do this on your own. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and give you a problem. So let's just say I give you this problem. You have, see what you guys can come up with. Let's do a squared minus 2a equal to 0. So we have a squared minus 2a minus 8 is equal to 0. Let's go ahead and try that. Well, let's go ahead and try it and see what we can come up with. So pause the video, go ahead and try completing the square and see what you can be able to do to get your answer. So pause the video, try it, and if you have any further questions, come back and we'll do it together. So now that you're back, now we have a squared minus 2a minus a is equal to 0. Well, like I said before, for our first step, let's go ahead and get our variables on one side and get our integers on one side. So let's do a squared minus 2a minus 8 is equal to 8. Sorry about that. So it'll be a squared minus 2a is equal to 8. Well, now what we can do here is we can go ahead and do the completing the square part. So because we have negative 2 as our b. So we have negative 2 divided by 2 squared is equal. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. That being squared is just 1. So now we can use this and add this to both sides to be able to see what we get. So we have a squared minus 2a plus 1 is equal to a plus 1. So now let's go ahead and break this down a little bit more, because 8 plus 1 is 9, so we have a squared minus 2a plus 1 is equal to 9. So now, is a squared minus 2a plus 1, is that factorable? Well, it is. because what we can use, and this is a little unique trick that I've learned throughout doing completing the square, is that this number right here will always be what you put in for a, whenever you do a -1 squared. It will always be that. Because if I did a -1, let's say I did a -1 and then a -1, a times a is a squared, a times -1 is negative a, -1 times a is negative a, and then -1 times -1 is +1. So that gave me a squared minus 2a plus 1. It's always going to be this number right here. Always. Whenever you try to go ahead and put this in, when you're trying to find the missing factor, the missing part for this. And then you just square it. If you don't believe me, try doing it a couple on your own, and it'll be so much simpler. So now back to what we're going through. So now we have this is equal to 9. Now what we can do is we're going to have the square root. This would be our second step. Square root both sides. You have a minus 1 is equal to, what is the square root of 9? People may say 3. People are going to say 3. Yes, I understand. However, it is also plus or minus 3, because the square root of 9 is 3. But we also have to keep into account that it could either be plus or minus, because we don't really know. So we're going to have to put plus or minus 3. So now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add the 1 to both sides. So you have a, before we do that, we're going to have to do 2 separate equations, because we have a minus 1 is equal to 3, and a minus 1 is equal to negative 3. So now, a minus 1 is equal to 3. Well, we're going to have to add the 1 to both sides. So we're going to have to add 1 to both sides. So then our a would be 4. And then if we had to add 1 to the other side, for this equation, we get a is equal to -2. So these will be our answers. A is equal to -2, and a is equal to 4. Not too bad, all right? It's not too horrible. So it's not too bad. These type of problems are not too bad. It's a squared minus 2a minus 8 equals 0. You have to plug in and then follow the steps that you've been shown, and that's it. Because our first step here, was to get our variables and our integers to one side of the equation. And then we went ahead and did the completing the square part. So we got here. And then our second step was we're going to have to square root. And then our last steps would be to do this part right here. And that would be our last step. Not too bad, not too terrible. So, well, What if I gave you a different problem? What is, let's just say we didn't have a 1 in front of here. What if we didn't have a 1 there? Well, let's go ahead and find out. Well, let's just say, what if I did 4x squared minus 8x minus 8x minus 32 is equal to 0. What if I did that? Wow. Looks scary, I get it. However, it's not too bad. We're gonna go ahead and get through this together, and we'll solve another problem as well. And that would be it for today. So for this problem, we have 4x squared minus 8x minus 32. Well, we're gonna have to get 1 in front of this x squared, all right, to be able to go ahead and try to at least move our integers to one side. So what we're gonna do here is, what if I told you there's a way to get this to 1? Well, let's see. How about you guys pause the video, come back, think of a way that you can be able to get 1 on one side. How can we get 1 on the side of x squared? Well, how can we get 1 in front of x squared as our coefficient? How can we get that? Well, go ahead and pause the video, think about it for like a minute, and then come back, and then we'll go ahead and go over it and see what you guys were thinking. Well, now that you're back, let's go ahead and try this. Well, I know some of y'all probably said this when y'all were thinking about it. What if we divided everything by 4? Let's try it. Divided this by 4, this by 4, and this by 4. And yes, we can divide 0 by 4, but we already know what that gives you. That would be 0. Because 0 over anything is just 0. So what's 4 divided by 4? That gives you x squared. And you have negative 8 divided by 4. That gives you negative 2. And you have the x. And you have negative 32 divided by 4. That gives you negative 8. So now we can go ahead and do this. Now we can take our integer to one side and go ahead and keep our variables to the other side. So let's go ahead and bring this negative 8 over to the other side. We have x squared minus 2x is equal to 8. Now we can go ahead and use completing the square. So then what we do here, we have negative 2 over 2 squared is equal to negative 1 squared is equal to 1. Why did I underline this 1, you may ask? Well, because that is what we're going to add to both sides of these to be able to, well, first factor this out and then make this side a little bit easier. You'll know what I mean in a few minutes. So you have x squared minus 2x plus 1 is equal to 8 plus 1. Now let's break this down, because 8 plus 1 is 9, alright? So we have x squared minus 2x plus 1 is equal to 9. So what if we factor out this? Can we be able to do it? Well, for you people who may have a hard time trying to factor this out, well, honestly, this is factorable. And well, what we can do here is use this part right here. Because whatever we do to factor this out, we have x either plus something or minus something, right? So, well, I've noticed as I was doing this, completing the square for a very long time, that we can be able to use this -1 right here. The number that's inside that is being squared, we can use that to factor this out. You don't believe me? Well, I'll show you in a few minutes. Well, because if I did this, x minus 1, and x minus 1, x times x is x squared, x times -1 is negative x, -1 times x is negative x, -1 times -1 is plus 1. So honestly, that just gives you x squared minus 2x plus 1. Still don't believe me? Well, that's okay. Well, if you mind, go ahead, try a couple problems. So what I would do is just do things like this. And then do completing the square on that part. What I would do is do completing the square on these. And if you still don't believe me, try them out yourself. Because anything you get when you're trying to square this number, this will be able to give you this. However, that'll be there for extra practice if you guys need it, to be able to keep on using completing the square. However, let's get back to our example. So, we have x minus 1 squared equals 9. Well, what we can do here is we can go ahead and square root. So we can go ahead and square root both sides. Well, anything squared over the square root will just cancel out. So you have x minus 1. Well, what is the square root of 9? What's the square root of 9? Well, people are going to say, well, it's 3, right? People will say square root of 9 is 3. I get that. However, it's just there's a time where either you don't really know whether it's positive or negative. So what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to use plus or minus 3. And then we go ahead and get to the good stuff. Now we make two equations. So you have x minus 1 is equal to 3. And then x minus 1 is equal to negative 3. Now what we do here is we add 1 to one side, to both sides. You have x is equal to 4. And then you have plus 1 x is equal to negative 2. And that's it. That's all that is to it. It's not too bad completing the square. So what I would do next is I'm going to go ahead and give you guys one of these type of problems. All right, go ahead. So I'm gonna go ahead and erase this. What can I give you that's not too bad? Because I like you guys, you know. So let's see, I don't want to give you guys something too bad. Well, let's just say 2x squared plus 4x let's see. What if I gave you guys let's see, 2x plus 4x give you guys 2 is equal to 0. No, let's do -2. Try this. Pause the video, come back, and we'll go ahead and go over this problem. Well, hope you pause the video, and we'll go ahead and go over this problem. Now, let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and divide 2 by everything. Then you have x squared plus 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. So now let's go ahead and get our integers to one side and get our variables to one, and get the variables to the other side. I have x squared plus 2x is equal to 1. That's our first step. Now our second step, go ahead and do completely squared. So b would be 2 over 2 squared, which is equal to 1 squared is equal to 1. So now we're going to add 1 to both sides. So we're going to have x squared plus 2x plus 1 is equal to 1 plus 1. And then we go ahead and have x squared plus 2x plus 1 is equal to 2. So now is this factorable? Of course it is. Let's go ahead and use this. Norma said, our little hint that I'm giving you. You have x plus 1 squared is equal to this 2. So now what will we do? Well, what we can do here is we can go ahead and do the square root of both sides. So now that we square root both sides, square root cancel, then we would have x plus 1 is equal, what is the square root of 2? Is that a perfect square? No. However, we still don't know if it's either a plus or a minus, because it could be either one. So we're going to go ahead and do plus or minus square root 2. Now we have make this into 2 separate equations. Let's make it into 2 separate equations. Do x plus 1 is equal to square root of 2, and then x plus 1 is equal to the negative square root of 2. So now we subtract 1 to both sides. X is equal to the square root of 2 minus 1, and then you have minus 1 on both sides. X is equal to negative square root of 2 minus 1. And we would want to keep it like this, because if we do that, this is a lot simpler and it's a lot easier. So, because you don't want to do this in decimals. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day.